Hey, true crime fans, Dr. Cassidy here. This is part two of the Venable and Thompson case. Um, my computer decided to crash or something on the last one, so it ended prematurely. So this is the second part of that. And we're almost done with this. There's so much, if you want to look this up, there's so much more that you could look at. But we really, it would be another 2 hours if we went through all of it. So when they were looking at some of the events of that murder of Bulger, they were also looking at, the psychiatrists and psychologists were also looking at, what was the motivation? Who thought this up? Who continued to make this more and more morbid as they went along? And, some of the eyewitness accounts were disturbing, of course, but no one really thought that two 10-year-old boys would be capable of this. So that's that bit of humanity that we keep. We think, oh, there's no way that would happen. It was even said that a bus driver saw Robert kick the baby in the ribs as they were walking him that 2.5 miles to his death, but nothing was done. And, they interviewed all those people, and they all were like, yeah, we saw him, and James was crying because he wasn't allowed to run free. They had all these excuses, but no one did anything. And, of course, after this happens, there's all kinds of regret. One elderly lady who noticed them, she was one of the 38, she said she approached them and asked what the problem was, and James was in tears. His face was bruised and red, and John and Robert claimed that they just found him at the bottom of the hill, and they claimed they didn't know him. She told them to take him to the Walton Lane police station just down the road and gave them directions. And while the little boy's injuries worried her, she pointed them in the direction of the police, but watched incredulously as they walked off in the opposite direction. She shouted after them, but they didn't turn back. As she stood there unsure what to do, another baby who had seen the boys earlier, another woman, said that James had been laughing. She believed the baby was okay. They were probably inexperienced brothers watching over the younger sibling. And now, after the fact, she said, I wish now I had done something. Very sad. Really. You would live with that literally for the rest of your life. Literally for the rest of your life. What's also unfortunate is how the body was found. There was a train engineer that noticed something on the tracks that looked like a doll, so it didn't really strike him as something unusual, because people are always putting things on the tracks, or things are, trash and stuff blow up on the tracks. And he said that neighborhood kids routinely laid things out on the track just to see what would happen to them. But after he thought about the missing child, he called the police that evening. And there were 4 boys that found James' body on the track on Sunday afternoon. 4 other boys. They said they were looking for footballs. They said it's a cat wrapped up, and then we seen its legs. John and Robert had laid out James directly on the track, aware that a train would soon come by. Perhaps they believed that the community would think it was an accident, that James had wandered up the tracks on his own and was run over. Or that if the train hit James, it would destroy all the clues. His upper body was hidden within a coat. His lower body was further down the tracks, completely undressed. He had suffered 42 injuries, most to his face and head, and had not died during the attack, but sometime before the train hit him. John and Robert had left him while he was still alive. It's not surprising that even the most experienced investigators were shocked and dismayed by the injuries to James. You slip into professional mode, but you can never, ever forget, said Kirby years later. It was bad enough that he'd been abducted and murdered, but the beating was brutal, incomprehensible. Although it was common knowledge that a train had severed James' body, the kids who discovered him were already talking to the reporters, you know. You can imagine. I can imagine they would experience some trauma, but that sensationalism and being noticed and being a direct witness to this would probably be exciting to a child. There was nothing that when I'm sorry, when the police decided to withhold the nature of James' injuries from the public, many were disappointed because they wanted that full story. But they were so horrific, and it would have been so inflammatory at that time that none of that was released until the court case, and really should not have been released then, in my opinion. Denise Bulger, who had been at the police station since her son's disappearance, sensed something was going on, and suddenly the office was buzzing and police were mobilizing. When she heard that a body had been discovered, she became horribly distressed, and there was nothing she could do but wait, hysterical but contained in the claustrophobic station, anticipating the terrible confirmation that they'd found James. Robert later brought a single rose to the crime scene. Other Merseyside mourners had created a makeshift memorial for James. Robert noticed that television crews were filming the mourners and later argued that if he had killed James, why would he bring flowers for the baby? At home, John showed an intense interest in the story of James' disappearance, which is very common. Many times, serial killers, violent offenders, they will even try to strike up, a friendship with a police officer so they can get an inside scoop on what is happening and if they're getting closer to figuring it out. So unfortunately, I talk about the families being victims. An anonymous woman called the police station reporting that her friend Susan Venables had a son named John who had skipped school Friday and had blue paint on his jacket sleeve. He resembled the boy in the video, and she said he had a friend named Robert Thompson with whom he skipped school that day. And with no other solid leads, investigators decided that John and Robert would be brought in for questioning. That was his mother. His mother is the one who reported him. And let me just say, strong woman. A strong woman to hand over her child. And I admire her for that. I mean, I do. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I could do that. But when the police showed up at their house, she told them that she knew that they'd be coming, of course. And when they looked at John's coat, which had been splattered with the blue paint, they thought that there even was a small handprint on the sleeve. John grabbed his mother and sobbed, "I don't want to go to prison, Mom. I didn't kill the baby." And he cried hysterically. "It's that Robert Thompson. He always gets me into trouble." Through tears, John told police they should speak to Robert, and as they drove to the police station, John continued to ask about Robert. Had they arrested him yet, and were they talking to him yet? But even despite their reactions, the police didn't believe they were the killers right away. It's because it was so horrific. Because it was so horrific. No one could believe it was two 10-year-old boys. In subsequent interviews, Robert described John as going out of control in a killing frenzy. He claimed that John threw more bricks at the baby and hit him with a big metal thing with holes in it. That, of course, was that iron bar from the railroad. Then John hit James with a stick. James was lying there still, eyes open, across the tracks. John put batteries and threw one of them at James's face. All the time, Robert said he was trying to pull John away, screaming at him to stop. I don't believe that. They even noted that Robert said on many occasions that I'm not a pervert, when talking about pulling down his pants and underwear and somehow touching his foreskin. And the parents pretty much cut off the interview at that point and wanted to allow the child to calm down because he was becoming hysterical. You can actually read very specific, transcripts of the interviews. And again, it's hard to believe that some of this stuff is coming out of the mouth of a 10-year-old. So another reason that nobody has forgotten this case. It's so disturbing. I just can't quit saying that. It's just so disturbing. So John has a psychological profile, and the Venables believed that John was a good kid and well behaved, but he was sometimes hyperactive. Susan worried about John. Susan was his mother. Worried that he was the victim of bullies at school and insisted that this was the reason that John was moved from one school to another. And at this new school, Susan believed that John befriended Robert Thompson because he felt sorry for him, but she worried that Robert was bullying John. How many times do we see bullying as one of the main contributors to violent outbursts? Tons. John's older brother Mark had speech and learning disabilities and was sent to a special school. He also exhibited an uncontrollable temper. John's younger sister Michelle also became a special needs student. John was in the middle and perhaps jealous of the extra attention his siblings received. John's parents repeatedly split and reunited, which undermined his sense of security in the family. John exhibited low self-esteem and seemed defensive if anyone suggested his family was not ideal. It was as if he was working hard to hide something. And that is exactly what I would expect to see, something similar to this. I would also expect to see some physical abuse. I would also expect for him to probably have a parent who is very authoritarian, but it does not say that. Bullying is enough, though, people. Bullying is enough. Dr. Susan Bailey, who examined John for the trial, said that she did not believe there was no organic disability or brain damage which caused his behavioral problems. She concluded he was fit to stand trial. Psychological reports assured that John did not suffer from any severe mental illness, including depression or hallucinations. He was anxious, fidgety, and temperamentally fragile. John could be easily distressed and was unable to discuss the murder. He did, however, report to his mother about flashbacks that haunted him, particularly disturbing images of blood spurting out of James' mouth. John also had rescue fantasies, dreaming that he saved James from harm and returned him safely to his mother. And it's important to understand that John understood the permanence of death, which would affect his understanding of the severity of the crime. John said that death meant that people could not come back and had an idea of heaven and hell as permanent places. In fact, he claimed to be scared of television violence. If there was a scene in a movie with blood coming out, John said he'd turn away from the screen and put his fingers in his ears. So psychiatrists were interested in John's intense relationship with his mother. If John had 3 magic wishes, they would be: 1, to be free from the secure unit, to turn the world into a chocolate factory, and to live forever with money, no accidents or illnesses. And if he could be anyone, he'd be Sylvester Stallone's Rocky or the Sonic Hedgehog because he ran fast and saved his friends. And that's the mind of a 10-year-old, Robert's psychological profile was a little different, I would say. Psychiatrist Eileen Vizard met with Robert and brought some dolls that represented the primary characters in the crime. They do that. They'll use puppets or dolls and let children recreate what happened. There was also a railroad track laid out and miniature weapons that were used in the assault. As Robert picked up the dolls and moved them through the motions of the murder, he demonstrated how the John doll senselessly beat the James doll, while the Robert doll tried to stop the attack. Robert showed how he tried to pull John away and how they fell backwards in the struggle, but he couldn't explain how the James doll sustained any sexual damage. When the psychiatrist continued to ask about any sexual abuse, Robert became increasingly defensive and agitated. He was willing to reenact everything else, and why not this? When the psychiatrist brought up the possibility that the entire attack was sexually motivated, Robert hardly reacted, as if he wasn't surprised, but he didn't deny or confirm the possibility. So how did Robert feel about James?